All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how's it going?
Things are good. Things are good. Yeah, I'm ready to dive in, jump into a couple interesting things. Yeah, I think you said you had some updates that we should
Yeah.
kind of alert the folks on there.
Yeah. So, we've talked a lot about the regulatory pressure that Amazon's under and how that kind of forces them to make decisions that don't really support end sellers. And it's not that they want to, it's kind of a forcing function. And I was looking at, some recent news here, and both Amazon and Walmart are under some pressure here. Walmart, or Amazon specifically, is under a monopoly claim lawsuit, which is like a larger problem. That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But Walmart specifically is getting sued over heavy metals and baby food. Now, is this just affecting online sellers? Not necessarily. It's really just a more general, broad thing. I bring this up because we talk a lot about this external regulatory pressure on these platforms and how that can have second order effects on the end seller. And we're going to keep seeing these things, right? Walmart's definitely going to see a lot less of these because they're much smaller, especially from a market size perspective. But as they continue to grow, and they're growing like crazy right now, that's going to continue to get worse. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying this like doom and gloom. I say these things to help sellers kind of check their perspective a little bit, right? We see it all the time. I've been jumping into a lot of lives in different Discord and Facebook groups and things like that. And there's a lot of Walmart's just better. And I don't think that's true. I think it's different. Everything has a pro and con. And you're seeing deactivations on Walmart. You're seeing brand gating on Walmart occur. Granted, not to the same degree, but you're still having these issues. And so I think it's just important, if you're considering making the transition, that you don't go in with rose-colored glasses, that you're keeping things kind of in check. You're like, okay, it's going to have its own problems. Some things are going to work. Some things are not going to work. They are a newer platform. And it seems like they're moving relatively fast to improve things. But at the end of the day, they're a platform like any other. And they're going to have some blind spots, some downfalls. And especially as we start to dive into it, we're noticing a lot of things. Being a developer has its own problems, pros and cons. And there's just a lot of things that don't fully make sense or is not as easy to do as it should be. And so, again, my point in previous conversations about this year's theme should be adaptability. You need to be able to zig and zag as the industry is changing. And when I say industry, I don't just mean Amazon or Walmart. I mean being a reseller. That's a big thing because so much is up in the air. You got tech that's taken over. A lot of different things are changing on that side of things. You got the regulatory stuff, all kinds of policy changes, and some of them don't immediately make sense in terms of like how it would hurt you, right? So like, okay, we're not going to have fee raises this year on Amazon. Awesome. But then there's a big policy change on reimbursements going into effect in, I think, early March. Well, that means your reimbursements go down, in theory, about 70%, which is a massive shift. That means you cannot rely on that as much. You're now breaking even if you don't give them your manufacturing costs. Reimbursement services are going to take a massive decline in profitability because if they're taking 10, 15, 20% of whatever they're recovering, that goes down by 70%. Their take home is much lower. And that's not a business model that you can really use things like AI or software to fully automate. It's really highly against TOS. And so you have to have an army of people that are doing a lot of this stuff. And yeah, you can automate some things on the operation sides on the back end, but there's still a lot of manual work being done. So a lot's changing. It's going to be a very interesting year. I say that all the time because I still fully believe that. But yeah, there's been a lot of things like that. There's been some concerns with basically marketplace integrity on Walmart. So the key thing here is that they've basically been under scrutiny for hosting unauthorized resellers of Trader Joe's, Costco's, and HEB's products. So like their actual exclusive products. That's creating some issues. Now, as a reseller, you think, well, that's just kind of how this works. What's the difference? And the reality is the difference is a regulatory issue. if you're not considered an authorized seller, there's this break or this perceived break in the chain of the logistics here. So, is it good? Is it bad? Now consumers start to kind of question, am I getting the real thing? And so whether it's true or not, perception does matter in e-commerce, especially with these larger platforms. And so that's going to create some possible problems too, where some brands, again, may be gated. Now, can you get over those things? In a lot of cases, you can. I think becoming an authorized seller of Trader Joe's is probably more difficult than easy. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of things happening. But what's interesting is that the stuff we're seeing on the Walmart side is not anything different than what we've seen on the Amazon side. It's just a rinse and repeat kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, like we've always talked about, it's not always the grass is always greener. It's a new space, so it may seem that way on the initial perception, but it's kind of one of those scenarios where you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's even the case for Walmart right now. Like they're just really starting to double down on this space. So they don't know what's effective for themselves as a business, and then in turn, maybe what's most effective for you as a seller as well. So it is always a very fluent, in motion industry, regardless of where you're selling. Just being a third party seller is always going to have its own hurdles and obstacles to jump through and over. So I think this just kind of supports the claims that we've been making, where you may just want to think a little bit harder about if it is a good time to jump over to Walmart, if you do decide to make that switch, what that switch is going to look like. And it's not all going to be everything's great over here, it's so much better than Amazon. It's going to be different, but different isn't always better. So you're going to have to try and figure out what makes the most sense for your business model, and then kind of make informed decisions moving forward based on the news in the space as well. Yeah,
and there's some new things that people are starting to pick up on. Amazon to Amazon flips has been around for a little while. People transitioned that over to Walmart flips and seem to be doing relatively well there. I'm seeing a lot of people doing about 25% of their volume being W2W. And everything in between, right? We're seeing people doing Amazon to Walmart flips, Walmart to Amazon flips. And so it feels a little bit more like the Wild West in the early days, where there's just so many different variations of sourcing your inventory that people are taking advantage of. And I think a lot of that's possibly going to be short-lived. I hope not, certainly. But I think the business models that have done incredibly well on Amazon will also do incredibly well on Walmart. So I'm looking at wholesale. I'm looking at private label to a degree. I think Amazon still crushes it with PL. But it's interesting. It's nice to see all these sellers get creative again, because I feel like on the Walmart side, a lot of that creativity started to kind of wane. It became a lot of like, you kind of pick one of the four, that's what you do it like everybody else, and that's it. Now I'm starting to see more people chat about ideas, experiment with things, and just see what sticks and what doesn't, and share that online, which is even cooler. So it does feel slightly like a resurgence to a certain degree of that creativity of problem solving. I've yet to really see anybody talk online about selling multi-channel and kind of their strategy, how they think about it, what are the principles and processes that they follow. I think that will come relatively soon, because again, from my perspective, I don't think it's one or the other. I think you sell on both, assuming you can and you're not deactivated, but you just understand that there's pros and cons to each one. You take advantage of the opportunities on each one of these platforms. That creates a lot more complexity on the operations side. If you only have 10 grand to spend, how do you divvy that up? And there are solutions for this. Managerial accounting, as boring of a class that is, there's a concept in there about how to basically make those decisions. Look at the volume, look at the profitability, and say, okay, well, let me, almost like a slider, let me figure out how do I get the maximum amount of either ROI or profit margin, or just straight profit in dollars, whatever you care the most about. Let me tweak what percentage of inventory I'm shipping out, assuming you have limited capital. If you don't have limited capital, then it's just additive. You just say, I'm moving 100 units on Amazon. I'm just going to try to move 30 units on Walmart. You're not pulling inventory away from Amazon's velocity. But a lot of sellers are limited to capital, so you kind of have to make that decision. And that's a hard one, because it's just like we talked about with repricing, right? You kind of have two levers. You have velocity and profitability, and they kind of oppose one another. This is the same thing that's occurring between these two platforms. On Amazon, you know you're going to get much higher velocity and lower profitability. On the Walmart side, it's slightly inverse. And so you kind of have to dictate what makes the most sense here. Now, with that said, for a lot of RA sellers that are not going super deep into units per SKU, that hit on velocity may not actually matter all that much, but the increase in profit margin could be far greater. So I think if you're doing wholesale, velocity does matter with wholesale. It's a volume game. And I think Amazon as a whole is a volume game, but you really got to understand the limitations of the model you're in. If you can only buy 5 units, do you really care if it takes an extra week to sell through all those, but your margin was 30% higher? Probably not. Again, this is where you get into those nuances. It really just depends with every single person. How much capital do you have? What velocity do you need to like keep growing? Because there is such a thing as growing too slow as an Amazon seller, not having enough velocity. And that's where a lot of eBay sellers struggle. They're not used to, FBA storage fees and things like that. They're used to it's just in my garage and I sell it when I sell it. And so if I don't, then I'm not losing anything else. It's more of like a long-term investment kind of philosophy. Whereas on these platforms, it is very much different, but it kind of feels like the spectrum is Amazon on one end, high velocity, eBay on the other, very low velocity, high profit margins. And then Walmart's kind of somewhere over here. It's like closer to Amazon, but not fully, neck and neck, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's going to be a give and get no matter what platform you're on. Like you said, Walmart right now seems to be a little bit more profitable, lower sales velocity, vice versa. On Amazon, we always talk about, selling on Amazon as your inventory ages, you want to become more aggressive to avoid those long-term storage fees, things like that. As of now, Walmart doesn't really have long-term storage fees. So how do those concepts kind of translate into Walmart? Maybe you don't really adjust your strategy for quite some time until they implement fees or whatever that structure looks like. Obviously, eBay is a whole different world in itself. I myself have been buying Blu-rays on Amazon or eBay recently for some good deals, but yeah, you just have to decide which lever you want to pull, profitability or sales velocity, and when you want to pull it. It's a little bit easier on Amazon, like we said, especially if you are FBA, you kind of know where those fees are going to start to kick in and when you want to maybe be a little bit more aggressive to avoid those in advance. But it's very, very fluent. You just have to kind of go with the flow as things change, as you see what's working for you, what's not working for you. And I always recommend trying to, join different communities, be parts of different online blogs or forums so you can kind of get information from different sources. But at the same time, what's working well for someone may not always work well for you as well. So got to always take everything with a grain of salt and look at it through the lens of your own business and what you see. Yeah.
And it's interesting, taking that framework we kind of developed for that life cycle, having those 3 strategies, and talking with Amazon or with Walmart sellers, we're like, what's your process here? And they're like, I don't, they're like, I don't care if it sits there for 6 months because the fees are so negligible. I almost use them like a storage facility. And so I know some sellers that are shipping in very heavyweight things and they're like, it doesn't really matter. Like the fees just don't add up at the same pace, volume, whatever, as they do on Amazon. Now, will that change? Yes, that will absolutely change. But again, short-term opportunities, maybe it's a good thing for now, right? If you have something where you're willing to wait a little bit longer, now you can wait longer for a better price than on Amazon. And so these are these subtle differences that you really need to be aware of. And we're finding a lot more as we dive into things. There's so much to it. Let's see, this is a good question here. See, Darian, how does Aura handle low inventory fees? Do those get accounted for when maintaining my minimum profit margin? How often does the FBA fee get updated per SKU? Low inventory fee can come and go as the sales velocity slows down or inventory starts to go into the FCs. Casey, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, so right now we do account for your referral and fulfillment fees. In terms of those additional fees, low inventory fees, those are going to be something you're going to want to have to account for on your own. So once you start to get into that territory, I recommend adding that fee into your costs on that specific listing or SKU there. In terms of the FBA fee and how often that gets updated on SKUs, like I said, referral and fulfillment fees, those will be updated constantly. And as sales come through, or it does initially estimate the sales metrics on a sale until it's officially finalized on Amazon's end, they then send us that data and that is reflected properly in your account. On Amazon's end, that data can come within a day. It can be a few days. It kind of depends on their process and when they finalize everything. But those FBA fees will frequently be updated and correct as those sales come through. But those low inventory fees, essentially any fees outside of the referral and fulfillment fee, you want to keep track of those and add those into your listing costs when they become applicable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Look at the fee differences between Amazon and Walmart, vastly different. But the application fee, or not the application fee, the application process on Walmart is very different too. They want to see history. They want to go check your reviews on other platforms. They're being a little bit more meticulous, which it's interesting. It creates a little bit of friction at the front end. But once you're in, the type of competition you're dealing with is very different because it's not just anybody, anybody who's willing to pay, $60 a month to be Prime eligible. So it's a very interesting thing. And even looking at the buy box dynamics, what's being factored in, things like that. There's this interesting thing that's happening right now where, you have the concept of regional buy boxes on Amazon, on Walmart, but those concepts are not there in the API. There's still only one price you can ever have. And so that's kind of an interesting mental model of how to think through the complexities of what we do. It would be so interesting if both of these platforms, even if just one of them, it would be amazing, would come out with that concept where you can have multiple prices, but based on region. That would be incredible. It'd be hyper complex. We'd have to rebuild everything from the ground up. But it would be nice. We could ask that a lot. But right now you can't do that. But yeah, it's funny going through Seller Central versus Seller Center. So Seller Center being on the Walmart side, vastly different interfaces, a lot different data, a lot of data that's not there or not easily acceptable or accessible, should I say. But as we're going through and testing a bunch of things, we're finding some interesting insights. One of the big ones that a lot of sellers are talking to us about right now is that basically like the incentive fee structure where Walmart will basically say, hey, you're charging 12, we're going to knock it down to 11, we'll credit you the $1. When that occurs, it actually creates a lot of friction for updating prices. And what a lot of sellers don't realize and what a lot of sellers are struggling with is your entire account can be auto-enrolled in that program. And that creates a lot of confusion because they're like, why did I sell this for 11? My minimum's 12. It's like, well, technically you're getting 12, but the sell price is different. There's a fee or an incentive that they put onto that. You can go in and remove yourself from that program, but from the sellers I've talked to, it's very confusing and there's a lot of complexity to it. So that's been kind of interesting. And also this listing quality thing is pretty cool. Amazon doesn't fully have this version of a listing quality score. And they're factoring in things like the actual copy, the product images, and price. Price gets factored into that. But at the same time, if you're not the listing owner, you can't really go in and change any of that. And so there's kind of this catch-22 where you get to see it and say, okay, I can make these changes, make a better listing here, especially on something that's replenishable for you. But if you're not the listing owner, basically the first person who created that, you can't make those changes. So again, we're noticing a lot of these things where it seems helpful, but you can't really do anything about it outside of just adjusting your price. But that's not just looking at your price, right? That's looking at a lot of different things. So Walmart's ecosystem is very much different. There's like 6 product IDs basically that they look at. There's the EIN, GTIN, Walmart product ID, Walmart identification number. And it's just like, oh my gosh, there's a lot here. And so I think it's easy for a lot of sellers who are migrating from Amazon to see a lot of these things and be overwhelmed at the complexity and just kind of how different it is. I think if you're a brand new seller jumping in for the first time just on Walmart, it's probably not that big of a deal. But we naturally have all these preconceived notions of how things should work moving from one to the other, because we just assume they're basically building the same thing here, but they're building it very differently. And even the way the buy box works, you're not rotating super fast. Once you have it, you're going to have a huge uptick in sales. And once you lose it, it's hard to get back in. The whole wait your turn kind of philosophy is what we're hearing a lot with sellers on the Walmart platform, which is you want to match, wait for it to rotate. Once that other seller runs out and you own it, don't touch it, and go about your days. So it's been fun to kind of dive into a lot of this stuff. I'm doing a live call this evening with a pretty big Walmart seller group, diving more into a lot of this stuff. But yeah, it's been super interesting. It's fun to dive onto a brand new platform that I haven't personally sold on. So there's a lot for us to learn, but it's been fun so far.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of data Walmart provides in terms of it being actionable. I know, I think it was last week or the week before, we talked about the main difference, or one of the main differences between Amazon and Walmart right now is that Walmart also sells in person.
Yes.
Via physical stores. So a lot of that data.
So your BSR basically.
Right, exactly. And so that's kind of a combined number that takes into account both online and in-person sales. I'm sure some of those identification numbers are specific to in-person and online sales as well. So as they start to mature and are able to splice that data a little bit more effectively, hopefully that is something that's easier for sellers to kind of assess and digest and make informed decisions on. But right now it does seem a little bit more limited in terms of, hey, here's this information, but there's not much to do with it at this point. But still important to kind of stay up to date, up to speed on updates that they're making, things that are changing, because if it ever does come to a point where something changes, where you can impact it directly, you obviously want to be prepared to do that. Yeah.
And I built out a 6-page content playbook for Walmart. So we're going to be diving into a lot of this stuff. The blog post we did earlier this week covered those differences in the bestseller ranks, so the BSR for Amazon versus Walmart. So we dive into a lot of that stuff. We're going to be sharing a lot of content and information related to Walmart, because there's a lot of things that are not super obvious, but once you realize it, it makes a ton of sense. You just need to know about it. So we'll be doing a lot of that. See, Terry, and this is funny. Let's be real. Walmart is just using these third-party sellers to collect data and then sell it themselves in the future, the Amazon playbook. It's kind of interesting, right? I want to riff on this for a bit, because this was a big deal on the Amazon platform, where they were taking a lot of that data, launching their own brands and crushing it. And they can, run ads for free because it's their platform. There's a lot of things that they could do to basically out advantage everyone else. Will Walmart do that? I don't know. I think it's very likely. I think it's more likely that Walmart will use that data to bring on brands that they're not currently working with, especially online. I think that would be a very smart decision for them to do that with, so that they can seed the supply side of things. This is what's really difficult about a marketplace, and that's all these platforms are, right? You have a supply side and a demand side. It's really hard to build both those out. You usually will, if you're large enough, have 2 separate teams trying to grow their independent areas. You tend to want third-party sellers to seed the supply side, so you don't have to deal with the logistics and operations of doing that. You basically are outsourcing your inventory. And then that allows them to focus deeper on gaining more customers, things like that. So, I think this won't happen for a while. I don't think they've reached a critical mass where they can really pull that off well. And I don't think it's really worth their time quite yet. I think their main focus, from what I've been seeing and talking to, has been, let's get great sellers on the platform. Let's keep them growing. Let's keep doing things there. So eventually, I think, that could very well be the case. But I think in the short term, probably not. I could be wrong. I'm not on their team, obviously, so I'm just completely speculating here. But we'll see. Who knows?
Yeah, it would make sense for them to probably steal a little bit of what's worked for Amazon and implement it themselves. But yeah, there's still some early stages right now. They may just be, learning about how to best support third-party sellers. They're going to see where they can maybe slide in those fees at some point where it's going to boost their bottom line, but not impact sellers too heavily. So yeah, it's just such a new space, and they themselves are learning, just like I said earlier. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to kind of make impactful changes quickly, or if they kind of let things kind of roll for a while and different problems will continue to arise. But yeah, it would make sense and be smart of them to do a little bit of what Amazon
what worked.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, basically don't recreate the wheel. Study Amazon. Whatever worked, replicate it and try to do it better. And what didn't work, avoid at all costs, unless there's a better alternative that you can experiment with.
Right.
And if they're being serious about it, I do think that's how they should be approaching it. Somebody's already laid the path, the blueprint forward here. You don't have to recreate it from first principles necessarily. I think you should still to a certain degree, but you can move faster, kind of resting on some of their laurels.
Yeah, and it makes sense with them being a little bit more, like you said before, meticulous, or a little bit more selective on the sellers that they're allowing on the platform. That's probably a quick learning that they saw building off of the lawsuits that Amazon lost last summer, knowing that, hey, there's going to be a little bit of liability involved. So let's make sure we're getting trustworthy people on board. So yeah, they'll definitely take some pages from the Amazon notebook and use them effectively.
Exactly. See, Patrick, hey y'all, I just started a free trial today looking to switch from Beequel. Welcome. Happy to have you. Does Aura link to Sellerboard? We currently do not integrate with Sellerboard. However, we do have uploads, which will allow you to export your data, format it, and then upload all your costs and stuff into Aura. And if you have any trouble doing that or need any help, just reach out to live chat support. Casey or Finn will jump in and help you. You can honestly just chat us with the actual file, say, hey, here's the things I need uploaded. We can format that for you, get it uploaded in no time. So we can speed up that process for you.
Yeah, and Patrick, as you look to do that, if you just navigate to the Uploads tab in your Aura account and you can select New, that'll be a drop-down menu, and you can select either empty template or pre-filled template, and that'll just populate with that importable format for you. So then you can export and kind of copy over that data from Sellerboard into that upload, and then send that up. One thing that is nice is once you upload a file, you can actually download that in the future. So then you can kind of use that as your own template if you don't want to look at all the extra data that's provided in those templates that we have. So a couple different options there, but yeah, definitely feel free to chat into support. Finn's running that now, and I'll be back on a little bit later.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny how a lot of the Amazon specific groups and branding is starting to break. AMZ this, Amazon that. A lot of these bigger, I'm going to call them brands. That could be a community, could be software, are starting to freak out and say, okay, well, Amazon's not the end-all be-all anymore. A lot of sellers are switching over to Walmart. We need a brand that's more holistic. And we were very intentional about this, gratefully. So it's not really affecting us, but we're seeing this even with conferences. A lot of AMZ specific conferences are rebranding because they're losing people. There are people that are like, hey, Amazon's cool, but like I'm shifting my focus over to Walmart and there's a lot more to learn over there. And so I want to spend my time on that kind of content. And so a lot of things are changing. It's so interesting. It's definitely shifted our industry rather quickly. Walmart has been around for a hot minute, but they just never really pushed for it. And Amazon wasn't painful enough for people to make the switch. And you're changing or trading velocity for profit margin, but it just wasn't a lot. A lot of people knew that they were going to take a massive cut on velocity that was going to put them in a really bad capital cash flow perspective or position. And that's starting to change. I mean, just looking at the growth rates for Walmart, it's pretty interesting. And by the way, we're talking, the growth rate itself is growing and the amount of competition is much, much lower. We're talking many millions of active sellers on Amazon and like hundreds of thousands on Walmart. vastly different environment. Now, will that change? Yes, 1,000%. So again, I think it's important to kind of keep these things top of mind to understand. And I think we talked about this last week with Terry jumping on, like, should he jump on to Walmart? It's like, well, it really just depends. I think it's at least worth testing at this point, because getting in early is probably a good thing. If I think about when I was a seller on Amazon, if I could have gotten in 3 years earlier, I could have maximized that opportunity with far less restrictions, far less capital to a certain degree, and far less competition. And so that's kind of what you're seeing on the Walmart side. Again, still has its problems. I'm not saying it's greener pasture here, but it's one of those things where you should at least be looking into it and having discussions and kind of making some interesting decisions. Because a lot of times, I talk to sellers and they're like, well, a lot of my big brands got gated on Amazon, so I just moved them all over to Walmart and it didn't really affect me that much. Okay, cool. So if you're doing wholesale and you have relationships with distributors or brands that you got brand gated on Amazon, well, don't just let those relationships go stale. Find the opportunity to take advantage of that. And so that's kind of it's not one or the other philosophy, right? Sometimes it's additive. Like I always say, like, if you're moving 100 units here and you're capped out, try to move 30 over here. But if you go from moving 2,000 units over on Amazon and you just can't sell on that brand anymore, great. Move those suckers over to Walmart. I'd rather you sell 500 units of something instead of two, or instead of zero. So again, that kind of portfolio approach kind of helps reduce a lot of your risk in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of your brands, if you're doing wholesale, want to be on Walmart because they're starting to talk about it too. And they don't really, a lot of these small to medium-sized brands don't want to do this stuff in-house. They just want to receive a PO, process it out, you deal with all that other platform stuff. Some brands will go in-house. It's not as common from what I've seen over the years. Your larger brands may, but that's outside of like RA and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a big shift.
Yeah, and I think you made an important point there. Like, it's really assessing whether going to Walmart makes sense as opposed to just making that move. Like we said, there's a lot of question marks over there right now. In that specific example where a seller was getting gated on different products and they're moving over to Amazon with those, Walmart with those products, that definitely makes sense. Right now, we know Walmart doesn't have a lot of gating around specific brands, but that could always change as well. So you always want to kind of protect yourself, but also make decisions that are impactful now. And it's always kind of finding that balance. You obviously didn't want to just sit with that inventory that you couldn't sell on Amazon and not make an adjustment there. But, if that happened in a smaller, more limited capacity, maybe eBay would have been an option as opposed to getting all set up on Walmart. So there's a lot of different things to consider, and not making rash decisions that could hurt you in the long run is definitely something you want to avoid. So.
Yeah, and there's new problems getting created, or I'm going to call it a new opportunity. If you look at the way scanning software is being developed right now, you basically have, we work with Amazon or we work with Walmart. And please, somebody in the comments, tell me if you have or use a software that does both. I would want to be able to go in to do RA or even OA and be able to scan something and it tell me, okay, here's what it looks like on Amazon, here's what it looks like on Walmart, here's my preferences. Don't buy this for Amazon, buy it for Walmart, or vice versa, or both. That's such a good opportunity instead of just being so isolated on that one platform like a lot of sellers are doing. You're kind of having to choose what mode you're in, right? I'm going to go source for Walmart today, or I'm going to go source for Amazon today. You should just be sourcing, and the software should be able to tell you, okay, that works here, doesn't work there, or it works both, or doesn't work at all. Awesome, let's move forward. I think that's the world we're going to have to get to on the scanning side of things, on the sourcing side of things. We're going to need a multi-channel approach for a lot of those tools. And I'm not really seeing it. I'm seeing the same thing we've seen with Amazon, but on Walmart, where we're the best at X for Walmart. But I don't think that really solves the larger complexity problem.
Yeah, there's going to be certain things that are easier to kind of capitalize on earlier. And then there's going to be things that are going to adjust as it evolves. So it's always so different compared to your specific business, right? Like one thing that's impactful may not be something that you can even accomplish. So, just always looking at platform risk, assessing pros and cons. That's how I make all my decisions in my life right now, pros and cons lists essentially. I always recommend looking at that and making sure that you're not jeopardizing anything in a major way. We always talk about, emergency funds, things like that, in case you get tied up in an unfortunate situation, and just actively avoiding a decision that could kind of make you need to start dipping into those funds, whatever it may be. You just want to make sure you're covering your bases.
And by the way, this problem also exists for inventory management. If you have to separate your inventory out and say, well, I use this software for Amazon, this software for Walmart, you're missing a big picture, which is combining those data points together. And it's just going to add complexity. But imagine having a software on the inventory management side that could understand, okay, well, you need to buy 50 units for Amazon and you need to buy 20 units for Walmart. And here's kind of the forecast that we're predicting for both. Great. It reduces a lot of that manual work of figuring those things out. And again, I think a lot of what we're going to see probably this year is a lot of software that becomes multi-channel native, meaning it's not bolted on. They're not two separate things, two separate features. They work together really well, and you can split things out however you need to. So I think that's where we're getting to, because I think it's a problem that a lot of sellers are going to start dealing with. I know a lot are wholesale going over to Walmart. I think that will possibly reverse a bit unless you've been deactivated or what have you. But yeah, it's a whole new game. It's a whole new environment. And I think you have to be very strategic with how you're approaching things, because if you close one door to go into another one, that may not be the right decision, or it could be. That's the hard part, right? Like there is no right answer here. But I think by laying out all the options and kind of talking through this stuff publicly, it allows people to kind of think for themselves, be like, oh yeah, I didn't consider selling on both. I was just thinking about getting off Amazon, but maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe not. Again, like we always talk about, it always really just depends. Let's see, Patrick, is there a way to input buy costs for foreign marketplaces using the buy costs I already have input with the US listing? Hope that makes sense. It does make sense. Casey, you want to hit that one?
Yeah, so you'll want to enter your costs in each marketplace in that respective currency. So if you did make a purchase and you're going to be selling, let's say, for example, on the Canadian marketplace, you want to do a manual conversion of what that cost would be in Canadian dollars, and then use that as your cost for that specific marketplace. That also obviously applies for the Mexico marketplace. You want to use that default currency. We don't currently have like an in-app conversion calculator for you. So you'll want to just find a reliable conversion calculator online and to do those calculations. And then you'll probably still want to use that bulk upload once you've made those adjustments to update those specific listings and SKUs in their respective marketplaces there.
Nice. Yep. That is it. Yeah, we always recommend to localize the currency. Or localize your buy cost. So yeah, if you purchase something for $20, you're also selling it on Mexico, you need to go ahead and convert that over to pesos and put that in on your Mexico listing. It also helps to have it kind of set in place from a currency conversion standpoint, which is a good thing as well. So,
yeah, and going back to the kind of initial or the current landscape of a lot of platforms really only supporting one marketplace or another. I think one thing that's interesting there is the data that's provided, because right now it is very siloed and individual. I'm sure we'll start to see platforms provide digestible data that is consistent across both platforms, because that's going to be what really helps you make informed decisions. As we were discussing earlier, Walmart can't really like cut and dice up and split their data in a way that's really effective right now because of the in-person factor. So hopefully they can kind of provide that data in a more digestible way, and platforms will start to adjust and provide you with data on both platforms that's consistent, and you can make informed decisions there, really figuring out, hey, really profitable here, slower sales velocity, I should divide my inventory based on these percentages of what's going to sell quickly on this marketplace versus the other. So yeah, we are still kind of in the very early stages of being able to have good data on both marketplaces to compare effectively. That's what really makes deciding on transitioning difficult right now, is it's a little bit of a guessing game with the data that you have, and hopefully the data that you'll accrue over time if you do jump over to another marketplace.
And if you're unaware of what Casey's talking about, basically the BSR on Amazon is different than the BSR on Walmart. So the BSR on Walmart will factor in retail sales velocity. So just because it looks great does not mean that it's going to do well on the website. So that creates some blind spots. And so what a lot of sellers are doing right now is, instead of relying on data, because there's just not a ton to make confident buy decisions, you get as close as you can and you order a few units and you test it. And then once you have your own data to see kind of how fast things are moving, profitability, then you can kind of use your own data to kind of forecast, figure out what makes sense, and kind of go from there. So there's a lot more testing and experimentation that's occurring on the Walmart platform over, where Amazon is actually drowning in data and you can make pretty accurate buying decisions. Even then, I would still recommend it, especially if you're doing wholesale, always doing test buys, things like that, 10, 25, 50 units, depending on how much volume you anticipate you can move. Just because sometimes the data is not correct. Sometimes, it looks one way, but it behaves completely different. And not all the data that you're seeing, even on like a Keepa, is as up to date as you want it to be. It depends on how often it's scraped. So if that one listing is not scraped as often, you're potentially missing out on a lot of the historical data, which means that you're only operating, let's call it, 20% data accuracy. So there's a lot of margin of error there. And so you're seeing a lot more of that on the Walmart side. But yeah, hopefully they will reverse that, or, split it out and say, okay, well, this is the total BSR, and then this is the online sales BSR. That would be super helpful, because I imagine they are vastly different numbers. But this is a big kind of quagmire, so to speak, for sellers right now.
Definitely. And there's always a little bit of trial and error when you're buying new inventory, seeing if it's going to sell effectively. And I just think that trial period may be a little bit longer on Walmart, especially after in lower sales velocity that tends to be there. And hopefully the error aspect of the trial and error isn't as intensive, but with them not able to split up that BSR, I would really encourage you folks to think about items that are probably not purchased online. I think I'd start to think of larger items, furniture, TVs, things like that. That's going to be kind of a corrupted data source in terms of the BSR for those specific types of items. If you're looking at, small toys for kids, Legos, things like that, people buy those online all the time. I bought some online yesterday. So definitely kind of take into account something that you may or may not buy online versus in person, and help that inform what might be an effective listing or product on Amazon, or Walmart rather.
Yeah. And from my understanding of the Walmart to Walmart kind of flipping process, a lot of people are basically doing RA at Walmart and then selling it online on Walmart, which puts you in an interesting position because of that BSR problem, right? You don't really know, but it's easier to do test buys with RA, because you could just buy 3 if you want to. Buy 1, just test it, see how it goes, and then just go deeper. Just go back up to the store and buy them out. So yeah, it's very, very different. There's a lot of those nuances where we're trying to accumulate all these nuances, all these differences, and put that into content. That way sellers are aware of it. If you are making that switch, if you've already made that switch, and you might have those blind spots on, we're trying to uncover a lot of those blind spots for you to understand how do things actually work versus those assumptions that I had, understandably, but falsely. So, but yeah, we're getting ready for kind of the conference season that's coming up here soon. So that's going to be fun. Again, I imagine a lot of the content is going to shift over to either multi-channel or Walmart specifically. A lot of big groups, a lot of big Discord groups are starting to either just add a Walmart section, or they're starting to, basically Walmart could be taking over the percentage of content on those platforms. So it is interesting to see people's focuses shift pretty fast. So I'm hoping, and I think, we've talked about this, a long time ago, but I do think that this is going to kind of force Amazon to make some different changes, and kind of fight for their sellers. And this is where you want to be at. You want these platforms to be fighting for your inventory. That means you're in the seat of power. The inverse of that is they can do whatever they want. You just have to deal with it or exit the game, which is not ideal. You want the inverse to be true, where you're more valuable to them than they are to you. And my hope, I'm not going to say it's my prediction, but my hope is that we start to transition more over to that world. We're already seeing Walmart call sellers, be like, hey, we want you on Walmart. Come check us out. So they're fighting for your business right now. Amazon's not really doing that, but I do think that could change.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to kind of witness Walmart's full press in terms of marketing to sellers. I think I've mentioned it a couple times. I listen to different podcasts that have nothing to do with being a third-party seller, and I've been hearing ads of Walmart, not just, hey, buy your things on Walmart, but hey, it's a great time to sell on Walmart. So they're not even advertising to consumers, advertising to you folks to try and get you over to their platform. So yeah, it has been an all-out blitz on their front. I think they did a big rebrand recently in terms
not
of
super
logo.
Big. It's they changed some stuff up, but it wasn't that big of a difference.
Yeah, but and then separately, like from a consumer standpoint, like watching the Super Bowl, there was a couple ads for Walmart, and they're really trying to advertise to younger generations to shop on Walmart as well. So trying to become not top of mind. Amazon's not always going to be top of mind, but I think that typically tends to be the first place a lot of folks will go if you're 35 or under. And Walmart's really seem to be pushing consumers to shop on Walmart, good shipping, all that jazz that Amazon initially started to advertise with. So yeah, it'll be interesting just to see how the market share of Walmart continues to grow, and then in turn, how many third-party sellers continue to segue over there as well.
Yeah, and Super Bowl ads are not cheap. So that should show you how much they are investing in getting more on the demand side, building up the user base, building up that demand. And they're doing something not to the same degree, obviously, but they're also investing heavily in getting new sellers, new brands on the platform. So again, good things that are occurring here. All things that point to a good direction, a good outcome. But again, with all that said, there's going to be new challenges where you're used to using a software to solve one problem on Amazon. That software does not exist for the Walmart side, or it's not possible to build. And so now you have to go the manual route or operate from more of a blind spot. And so again, all things I want everybody to keep in mind here. It's not a doom and gloom conversation, but just keep things in perspective here. I am curious to see how this Q4 is going to go with so many sellers migrating over to Walmart. Obviously, Walmart's going to do well during Q4, not nearly as well as Amazon's going to do. I think Amazon posted, I think I have it here. Yeah, Amazon's Q4 2024 results highlighted a 30 to 40% price performance boost. Oh wait, hold on. Oh, that's for AWS. Never mind. Either way, Amazon's going to do really, really well during Q4. We all know this, but I think Walmart's going to do proportionately as well. Right? They got 10% of the market. It's not going to equal the same dollars, but it's going to be pretty big. So. But I am curious what the pricing dynamics are going to be like. We know that on Amazon during Q4, we can see massive price increases because the demand just balloons. With Walmart being more profitable, I wonder how much inventory people will transition from Amazon to Walmart, because just lower fees. And if the sales velocity demand increases enough, it could offset anything that they were doing on the Amazon side. So again, these are big strategy level conversations, and I think you should lean on your data to make these decisions. But if you are selling on both, and it's going to be your first year going through Walmart's Q4, there's not a ton you can really plan for. There's some kind of assumptions you can make and some guesstimations, but save that data. Store as much of it as you can so you can make better decisions the following year. But again, all things that I think sellers are really going to have to deal with, or you have expectations because you've been selling on Amazon for so long, and you know what Q4 is going to be like there. You go to Walmart and you expect the same kind of outcome, and it doesn't happen. Now you feel like you failed. Actually, you did. You proportionally did the exact same thing, just a different marketplace. And so again, should you get rid of Amazon entirely? I don't think so. I mean, Q4 alone could be a good enough reason to keep it. You do like minimal amount on Amazon, but during Q4, you're like, hey, we're going to ramp things up here. Welcome to the challenge, welcome to adaptability. It's all going to be interesting, but I think a lot of sellers are going to find that sweet spot for themselves. Sellers are pretty good at learning fast, figuring things out, being scrappy. I just hope a lot of sellers who do well will share their strategies and how they're thinking about it and making decisions so that other sellers can kind of lean on that information.
Yeah. If it was easy, everybody would do it. So we obviously know it's not easy because not everybody does it. So exactly.
So we got about 10 minutes here. I know we got a lot of people kind of just watching and listening to us gab here, but if there's any questions, anything we could dive deep into, we are more than happy to do so. But we got about 10-ish minutes here.
Yeah, speaking of Walmart's investment on the marketing front, I think the average price for a 30-second commercial for the Super Bowl this year was $8 million. So to even make a commercial, that's probably pushing you up over 10 if you're talking about production and all that stuff. So yeah, it'll
easily.
So that's a heavy investment for one day, and I'm sure they've invested more than that throughout the remainder of the year. So
I would actually love to see how much Amazon's investing for new customers and how much Walmart is. I imagine Walmart's spending a lot more to gain traction, whereas Amazon's more entrenched. But those numbers, I'm gonna have to look into that. That's gonna be, if they're public, that's gonna be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm curious to see how their public stock's gonna do.
Yeah, it's always funny to see how this stuff responds, especially coming off different lawsuits and things. Once those settle, that always has an initial swing up or down. So it'll be interesting, and always just stay up to date with all the headlines, things that are going to be changing frequently, may or may not impact you, but it's always good to be in the know and think about how different areas may affect your specific day-to-day based on your business setup as well.
Yeah. And I like using Perplexity for this, dump in a bunch of information, a bunch of context, and just be like, hey, what happened this week or the last 3 weeks that would affect an Amazon third-party reseller or a Walmart third-party reseller? It'll repeat a lot if you're doing it frequently enough, like I do. I'd probably do it every few days. But it just exposes you to like some different resources. It might highlight something like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Nobody's been talking about that. And you do pretty well. Patrick, all this. Does it work connect to Walmart because their repricing platform is garbage? Not yet, but we are actively working on it and should have something for you soon. So I can't publicly announce anything quite yet, but I can say that we are actively building that now. And I hear the sentiment quite a lot. I hear that it's very fast, which I would hope it would be if it's in their platform. But I have heard a lot of negative things where sales went down 80% and nothing's moving. So I hear a lot of that. So we're taking in a lot of this feedback, understanding what people are trying, how are they trying it, how's it working. So yeah, that's a P0 for us right now. Great question though. Soon, very soon. And this kind of goes in alignment with what we've been talking about, right? This multi-channel approach. I think it just matters. We're eating our own words here and going that route too, because that's the world that we see. I think you're going to get away from a world where you have all these hyper specialized softwares and you need 30 of them you probably need like 4 that do, a bunch of things really well in their kind of respective areas. So yeah, hopefully reduce the amount of softwares that you need that are separate. That's frustrating. I think even at my small scale, back when I was a seller, I had like 7+ tools. I'm like, oh my gosh, how's this possible? Like you can spend $1,500 a month on software day 0, and it's insane. And you should not do that. But yeah, it adds up fast.
Yeah, we always say we want your platforms to work for you, not you work for your platforms. So if you ever find something bogging down your process, think about cutting it out completely or looking for an alternative, because that is just not serving you in the way that it can or should.
Exactly. Oh, Lil Wayne, this is interesting. Have you all heard anything about how Best Buy Marketplace is doing for resellers? I haven't heard anything yet. Um, by Best Buy right now feels like Walmart fell 2 or 3 years ago. Like it's kind of there. Nobody's really talking about it, but some people are doing some volume, but it's not like much. It's more like a supplemental kind of marketplace from what I gather. I'm seeing more people talk about Target lately. Not a ton. Again, it's glimmers here and there, but I am seeing some more people talk about Target. I do think that Target would be a better sales platform than Best Buy, just because of how well they do from a retail perspective. Basically, the brand is more generally understood, versus Best Buy is a little bit more tech focused. So that could be a huge opportunity if you have tech connections and stuff like that. But I think Target's probably going to be your best bet from a more generalized approach, kind of like what Walmart is, right? Like you can sell on Newegg, but it's a very specific niche marketplace. And if you don't have that kind of inventory, it's really not going to do much for you.
Yeah.
And when are they planning on launching theirs? I don't know the exact date. I know that people are starting to get approved. It seems very hush hush right now, but it is happening. So I imagine probably not much longer for them to go public. I assume they're watching Amazon. I assume they're watching what Walmart's doing. Again, all these big players are watching and maneuvering with each other. So it could be that they're going to be very stringent in terms of application acceptance early on, and then that could become more evolved over time. Kind of what I think Walmart will do. I think in the early days, they're going to be very specific to protect themselves, but over time, they'll gain some confidence. They'll loosen up a little bit. But yeah, we'll have to see. I'm not sure exactly when Target's gonna happen, but I am already seeing movements online with people getting approved for Target, and there are some people that are helping with that process.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I mean, Target's a little bit more of a direct comparison to both Walmart and Amazon because, for lack of more details, they all sell everything. Whereas Best Buy is much more tech focused. I know it was it was a sad day for me and a couple friends when Best Buy announced they would no longer be selling Blu-rays in person. They got rid of all their Blu-ray stock in person. That was always a good place to shop for things like that. But if you do have tech connections, Best Buy might be a great avenue to kind of take advantage of that. But outside of tech focused or tech oriented products, I would think Target would probably be, for lack of a better term, third in line behind Amazon, Walmart, and then Target whenever they decide to go public. I'm not including eBay due to like the auctioning functionality that's kind of in its own category, if you will. So
and this harks back to what I've been saying, which is like, it's not, what platform should I sell on? It's which platforms should I sell on? And how do you answer that question? I think it really depends. Like, the categories that are going to do extremely well on Target are going to be different than on Amazon than on Walmart to some degree. There's obviously always going to be overlap. But if you just think about why people go to Walmart versus why people go to Target in person, that kind of gives you some idea of like, okay, there is a difference here. And that could, simply be, in a lot of cases, socioeconomic. Or it could be, well, I like their home and goods stuff and I just like them for groceries. Okay. And this is why data matters so much, right? Because if you're not sourcing just for each individual platform, but you're sourcing and then running the data to say, well, where's the best place to put this? And it might not be one, it might be all three, but it might be 80% goes to Target and then 10% goes to Walmart, 10% goes to Amazon. I think this is the world we transition to. So it's going to be more complicated, but again, software can help a lot with this. We just have to build it. I'm curious to see Target because I'm a huge Target guy. I like Target. Target's fun. Yeah, popcorn and ices, so we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, we're starting to take a look at a lot of this stuff. There's Mercado Libre, on the Spanish side, I think mainly like Brazil. They're doing pretty well, but still, everybody's still relatively small compared to Amazon. But a lot of things are starting to change. I think a lot of younger generations are willing to go to other platforms, and as long as the branding matches what they expect and the expectations for shipping, speed, and pricing is the same, I think they're a little bit more open to buying on Walmart versus just straight Amazon. Like I still default to Amazon because that's my behavior, but seeing what's happening with Walmart, that may change. So we'll see. Cool. So we will wrap it up here for time. Appreciate everybody making the time. We do this every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. We just jump on here. We gab a little bit about some news and things that are top of mind for us, but we want to make sure we can dive into any questions that you guys have. And we have some awesome announcements coming out soon, so look out for those. Casey, any last words?
No, that's all I had. Have a good rest of the week, folks, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.